A boy's bold words left an entire courtroom speechless. "You're my mom." What happened next will break your heart. The courtroom was packed, the kind of tension-filled atmosphere where even the shuffle of papers felt too loud. It was a custody hearing, one of the countless cases that passed through the desk of Judge Evelyn Harper. She was a figure of poise and authority, her gavel a symbol of finality. At 55, Judge Harper had spent decades presiding over cases, earning a reputation for fairness and an unflinching adherence to the law. But this case was about to change everything. Seated in the middle of the room was a 10-year-old boy, small for his age, his feet barely touching the ground as he swung them nervously. His name was Elijah Daniels. With wide, searching eyes he scanned the room, avoiding the glares of the two attorneys locked in a heated debate over his fate. Elijah wasn't just another case. There was something about his quiet presence that tugged at the room in a way no one could quite articulate. Judge Harper adjusted her glasses, her expression calm yet authoritative. She glanced at the boy briefly before turning her attention back to the attorneys. The arguments blurred together. Stability, best interests, permanent placement. She'd heard it all before. But as she prepared to interject, Elijah suddenly stood up. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Heads turned sharply. Even the court reporter's hands paused over the keys. I just want to say something." Judge Harper leaned forward, surprised but composed. "Elijah," she began, her voice steady. "This isn't the time." "You're my mom," Elijah interrupted, his voice trembling but resolute. The words fell into the room like a dropped pin in an echo chamber. The air in the courtroom seemed to freeze, and every eye turned to the judge. But this moment was just the beginning. For a moment the courtroom was suspended in silence, a tableau of shock frozen in time. The attorneys, mid-argument, exchanged bewildered glances. The court clerk shifted uncomfortably, and the bailiff, usually unflappable, raised an eyebrow. Judge Evelyn Harper's practiced composure faltered for the briefest second. Her lips parted slightly as if to respond, but no words came. She blinked, quickly regaining her stoic mask, but the ripple of confusion had already begun to spread. "Elijah," she said carefully, her voice low but steady. "This isn't the place for personal statements. Please take your seat." The boy, however, stood his ground, his small frame somehow radiating an immovable determination. "I know you're my mum," he repeated, louder this time, his words carrying an undeniable conviction. Gasps echoed across the room as whispers broke out among the spectators. A woman in the back leaned toward her neighbor. "What's he talking about? Is she really?" "No way," came the whispered reply. "She's a judge. They vet these people, don't they?" The murmurs grew louder until the judge banged her gavel twice, her sharp voice cutting through the noise. "Order in the court!" Elijah didn't flinch. He stood there, his fists clenched at his sides, his face a mix of fear and determination. Judge Harper stared at him, her professional mask slipping ever so slightly as something deeper, confusion, perhaps even recognition, flashed in her eyes. But she quickly smothered it, turning to the boy's court-appointed guardian. "Mr. Lawson," she said, her tone firm, "control your client." The young man, clearly flustered, hurried to Elijah's side and whispered something urgent. Elijah hesitated, his eyes darting back to the judge. But the determination in his gaze never wavered. Finally, he sat down, though his posture was stiff, his small shoulders tense. The attorneys attempted to resume their arguments, their voices shakier now, tinged with uncertainty. But the energy in the room had shifted entirely. Every spectator, every official, every participant was now focused not on the custody battle at hand, but on the quiet storm brewing between the boy and the judge. Evelyn Harper tried to focus on the proceedings, but her mind was racing. She had presided over thousands of cases in her career, yet this moment felt different. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt the boy's gaze like a weight pressing down on her. Something about his face, those eyes, so achingly familiar, made it impossible to look away for long. The courtroom continued on, but the judge's usual clarity was clouded. When the opposing attorneys asked her for a ruling on an evidentiary matter, she paused longer than usual, her mind caught in a loop of questions. Was this some sort of manipulation? A stunt? Or was there a truth buried somewhere in the boy's words? From her seat, she stole a glance at Elijah, who was now sitting quietly but still watching her. The intensity of his gaze sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't the look of a desperate child seeking attention. It was something else entirely, something deeper, something that tugged at a corner of her mind she hadn't visited in decades. The hearing continued, but the atmosphere was charged. The boy's words hung over the room like a storm cloud, and though Judge Harper tried to press forward, she couldn't escape the growing sense that the past she thought she'd left behind was closing in. Judge Harper's hands rested on the polished wood of the bench, steady to the outside world but trembling in her mind. She had dealt with unruly defendants, hostile attorneys, and gut-wrenching family disputes. But never in her decades-long career had she been thrown off balance like this. Elijah's words echoed in her mind, unraveling the tight threads of her composure. "You're my mom." It was absurd, wasn't it? Yet the way he had said it. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It wasn't the desperate plea of a child grasping for any form of connection. It was a declaration, simple and pure, and that was what unsettled her the most. As the attorneys argued back and forth, their voices barely registered. Her focus kept drifting back to Elijah. The set of his jaw, the defiant lift of his chin. It all felt painfully familiar. And then there were his eyes, deep brown with flecks of amber that caught the light. She had seen those eyes before, but not in this courtroom. Not here. Not now. A memory pushed its way into her thoughts, unbidden and unwelcome. It was from a time she had locked away, convinced it was better left untouched. She saw herself at 20, a college sophomore in Durham, North Carolina, juggling night classes and a part-time job at a diner. It was a different world, one where she was still Evelyn Daniels, not yet the dignified, accomplished Judge Harper. Back then, she had dreams but no clear path to achieve them. And then, there was the mistake. She felt a lump form in her throat as the fragments came rushing back. The boy she loved but couldn't depend on, the harsh whispers of her family's disappointment. The grueling weeks spent agonizing over the impossible decision she had to make. She was so young, and the world had been so unkind. A sharp voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Your Honor? Your ruling on the objection." The lead attorney's tone was tinged with impatience, but Judge Harper barely noticed. She blinked, trying to mask her disorientation, and cleared her throat. "The objection is sustained," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Proceed." But even as the case continued, her mind remained trapped in the past. Could it be possible? Could Elijah be? No. She had been careful, meticulous. The adoption had been closed, sealed tightly to protect everyone involved. She had signed the papers and walked away, swearing never to look back. It was the only way to ensure that the baby she had brought into the world would have a chance at a better life, one she couldn't provide. Still, the boy's face haunted her. She found herself sneaking glances at him as the attorneys presented their evidence. He seemed so small and vulnerable, yet there was a quiet strength about him that reminded her of someone she hadn't thought about in years, herself. It was a strange, almost absurd thought, but it refused to leave her. The hearing continued, but her focus wavered. The boy's earlier words played on a loop in her mind. She didn't know if this was fate, coincidence, or some cruel joke, But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something irreversible. The choices she had made so many years ago were colliding with the present in a way she hadn't thought possible. When the attorneys paused for a recess, Judge Harper retreated to her chambers, desperate for a moment of clarity. She paced the small book-lined room, her heels clicking on the tiled floor. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass pane of a framed certificate on the wall. Her carefully curated life, her flawless reputation. It all felt fragile now, as if one word from that boy could make it crumble. She thought of Elijah sitting out there, waiting for her to return. Why would he say something like that? How could he know? She had no answers, only an overwhelming sense that the past was no longer content to stay buried. The courtroom was waiting, the case unresolved. But as Judge Harper stared at the door leading back to the bench, she knew this was no longer just another case. It was personal. And there was no turning back. Elijah Daniels sat quietly in the corner of the courtroom, his small hands gripping the edges of his chair, as though the world might tilt and throw him off at any moment. The murmurs around him had died down, but the tension lingered. His statement had changed the atmosphere, and even he could feel it. Yet he didn't regret saying it. He couldn't. Elijah's life had been anything but ordinary. He had been in and out of foster homes since the age of 4, shuffled from one family to another, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit anywhere. Some homes were kind but temporary. Others were cold, places where the rules were clear. Be quiet, stay out of sight, don't ask questions. And through it all, Elijah had clung to the faint hope that somewhere, someone was looking for him, that there was a place he belonged. He first heard the name Evelyn Harper 6 months ago, in the quiet murmur of a whispered conversation he wasn't supposed to hear. It was in one of his foster homes, during a late-night argument between his foster mother and a social worker. "We're still trying to finalize his case," the social worker had said. "There's a name that keeps coming up. Evelyn Harper." Elijah had tucked the name away in his mind, repeating it to himself like a secret prayer. He didn't know who she was, but the way the social worker said it sounded important. Maybe even connected to him. Over the next few weeks, he started asking quiet questions, piecing together fragments of conversations and documents he was never meant to see. He learned that Judge Evelyn Harper had signed some papers a long time ago, papers tied to his adoption. That was all he needed to know. Elijah was smart, sharper than most adults gave him credit for. He didn't understand everything about the legal system, but he knew enough to realize this wasn't a coincidence. He had spent years wondering why he didn't have a family, why no one seemed to want him. And now he had a name. He had to know if the judge sitting before him, the woman with the serious face and piercing eyes, was the missing piece of his life. His current foster placement with Mr. and Mrs. Daniels was better than most. They were kind enough, though distant, like they were afraid to get too attached. Elijah liked Mrs. Daniels' warm laugh and Mr. Daniels' quiet strength, but it wasn't the same. They weren't really his. And even though they were considering adopting him, a part of him hesitated. What if they weren't his real family? What if his real family was out there, waiting for him to find them? When Elijah walked into the courtroom that day, he hadn't planned to say anything. He knew the hearing was about his future, whether he'd stay with the Daniels or be placed elsewhere. But the moment he saw Judge Harper, something inside him shifted. Her face was familiar, though he couldn't explain how. It was like staring at an old photograph you'd forgotten existed. He felt it in his chest, a strange pull he couldn't ignore. And then he said it. He hadn't meant to blurt it out. It just came rushing out of him, like the words had been waiting all his life to be spoken. "You're my mom." The reaction had been immediate. Gasps, whispers, the judge's stunned expression. But Elijah didn't care about the chaos. He cared about her. He needed her to know, to acknowledge him, to tell him he wasn't crazy for feeling this way. Sitting in the courtroom now, he wondered if he had made a mistake. Judge Harper's expression was unreadable, and he didn't know if she believed him, or if she even cared. But deep down, Elijah knew the truth. He wasn't just some kid saying something wild to get attention. He felt it in his bones. She was connected to him in a way no one else could be. Elijah glanced at the Daniels, who sat nearby, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. He loved them in his own way, but this was bigger than them. This was about the questions that had haunted him for years. Why was he given up? Who had made that decision? And why did this woman, the judge with the steady hands and the piercing gaze, seem to hold the answers? The room was quiet now, the tension thick enough to touch. But Elijah's heart was louder than ever, and he knew there was no going back. He had opened the door, and the truth, whatever it might be, was waiting on the other side. The courtroom was silent, save for the soft rustling of papers and the faint hum of the overhead lights. Judge Harper sat at her bench, her expression meticulously controlled. But inside, her mind was racing. Elijah's words had pierced through her like a sudden gust of wind, unsettling the carefully stacked memories she had locked away for decades. She leaned forward slightly, clasping her hands together on the bench. "Mr. Lawson," she addressed the boy's guardian, "I'll need a brief moment with counsel in chambers. Bailiff, recess the court for 15 minutes. The bailiff nodded, and as the attorneys and spectators began to file out, Judge Harper remained seated, her eyes locked on Elijah. He returned her gaze unblinking. There was no anger or desperation in his expression, just a quiet determination that both unnerved and moved her. Once in her chambers, the attorneys shuffled in, visibly tense. The judge shut the door behind them, turning to the lead counsel for the foster agency. "Ms. Delgado," she began, her voice low and controlled, "I need you to clarify something for me. Is there any record, sealed or otherwise, that connects this child to my past?" Delgado looked startled, glancing quickly at the other attorney before answering. "Your Honor, well, not to my knowledge, but I can investigate further." "Do that," Harper said firmly. She felt her chest tighten but didn't let it show. "I also want access to any adoption records involving Elijah Daniels. I understand sealed files require authorization, but considering the circumstances—" She paused, her voice faltering for just a moment. "It's necessary." The attorneys exchanged uneasy glances, but they nodded. "We'll expedite the request," Delgado assured her. Returning to the courtroom, Judge Harper reclaimed her seat, her mask of professionalism firmly in place. But as the proceedings resumed, the questions swirling in her mind grew louder. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. Later that evening, she sat alone in her office, the glow of her desk lamp illuminating a stack of old case files. She had insisted on obtaining the adoption records herself, unwilling to leave something so personal in the hands of others. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the folder, her eyes scanning the faded documents, and then she saw it. Her own name, listed as the biological mother of one Elijah Daniels. The air seemed to leave the room as she read the words over and over, her heart pounding in her chest. Memories she had buried deep came rushing back. The endless nights of guilt, the weight of signing those papers, the hope that he would find a family who could give him everything she couldn't. Her mind reeled, but the undeniable truth was staring back at her. Elijah wasn't mistaken. He was her son. The next morning, Judge Harper entered the courtroom with a resolve she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't sure how this would end, but she knew one thing: Elijah deserved the truth. As the hearing resumed, she cleared her throat, her voice steady. "Before we proceed, I need to address something that has come to my attention." Her words hung in the air, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. She turned to Elijah, her gaze softening. "Elijah, what you said yesterday. I need to ask you something." Elijah sat up straighter, his eyes wide with anticipation. "Okay," he whispered. "Why do you think I'm your mother?" she asked gently. He hesitated for a moment before answering. I found papers. They had your name on them. And when I saw you here, I felt it. Her chest tightened, but she managed a small nod. Elijah, she began, her voice faltering slightly. What you're saying, it's true. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as Elijah's eyes filled with tears. You mean, you are my mom? Yes, she said softly. I am. For a moment the room seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them. Elijah's face crumpled, and tears streamed down his cheeks. Judge Harper felt her own eyes sting as she fought to hold back her emotions. I didn't know this would happen, she said, her voice breaking. But I want you to know. I never stopped thinking about you, not for one day. Elijah stood, his small frame trembling, and Judge Harper rose from her bench. Ignoring the stunned faces around her, she stepped down and walked toward him. He hesitated for only a second before running into her arms. The courtroom erupted in whispers, but neither of them noticed. In that moment, the years of pain, questions, and longing seemed to melt away. It wasn't a perfect ending. There were still legal battles ahead, questions to answer, and challenges to face. But it was a beginning. The truth was out, and as they embraced, it was clear to everyone in that room that sometimes the law isn't just about rules and decisions. It's about justice, and the courage to confront the past for the sake of a better future. The courtroom had never witnessed a moment quite like this. Judge Evelyn Harper, a pillar of justice and composure, embracing the boy who had unknowingly changed the course of her life. It wasn't just a mother and son reuniting. It was the breaking of years of silence, regret, and unanswered questions. In the days that followed, the legal implications of their bond became the focal point. Evelyn recused herself from Elijah's case, ensuring that another judge, impartial and experienced, would oversee the next steps. But Evelyn didn't step away from Elijah. She met with his social workers, spent time with his foster parents, and began piecing together the years they had lost. For Elijah, the uncertainty of what came next didn't overshadow the joy of knowing where he came from. The answers he had sought for so long were finally his. And with them came a newfound sense of identity and belonging. Their journey wasn't simple. The road ahead was full of hurdles, both legal and emotional. But for the first time, they were walking it together, armed with truth and a mutual determination to heal. This story isn't just about a surprising courtroom twist. It's about the power of truth to bridge even the widest gaps. It's about forgiveness, of others and ourselves. It's about resilience and the human capacity to rise above the past, to create a brighter future. Sometimes life takes us down unexpected paths, and the choices we make can echo for decades. But as Evelyn and Elijah learned, it's never too late to reclaim those echoes and turn them into something new. If this story moved you, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt tales that remind us of the enduring strength of family and love.